Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival. I'm John Shea of the San Francisco Chronicle, covering the Giants and the A's and baseball for many decades. And I was going to say centuries, but I'm not that. Yeah, with these teams in this history, definitely. But I'm pleased to be here, and thanks very much, Carrie, for having us over. And it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Haft, a longtime acquaintance and colleague and friend who wrote a wonderful book that is unlike any other book that I've read on baseball, on the Giants, if only because it encompasses himself. Not to be a me, I guy, but he did something, the way he wrote this creatively, has reporting, has creative writing, has many fresh interviews. And the name of the book, If These Walls Could Talk, the reason I like it so much is because it's not just a rehash of year X, 2010, 71, 62, whatever. It's a look back. Almost a lot of it is first person, but like I said, it's not so much that he makes it about himself, because it really isn't. But the stories he tells about himself as a 12-year-old, as a 22-year-old, as whatever the heck he is now, year old, is pretty fascinating in a kind of a different way to present history and baseball and the Giants, who were awful for a long time, but have been pretty good up until this year. So we're going through that down cycle, I think, that might last, who knows. But Chris, welcome.
John, thanks for the kind introduction and the kind words. And I guess in a way I have to thank the Giants for making this possible. I did not pick out the title, just to maybe explain a few things about the book. It's a series that of books that Triumph Books has put out. They're based in Chicago, and they really wanted, as John indicated, just a collection of anecdotes. They asked me to pattern my book after one other If These Walls Could Talk model or book about the Yankees, who I know everybody out there loves. And Jim Cott, the former pitcher turned broadcaster, was the author of that book. And of course, he had a myriad of experiences to share with his readers about pitching for the Yankees, pitching in the majors, and being a broadcaster. So I thought, they said, write your book like his. Well, I never pitched an inning or, stepped between the lines. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? But, I did have a lifetime of following the Giants and, yes, rooting for them. I'm lucky in that I feel like I'm able to compartmentalize when I was a kid waving the pennant and the foam finger and all that. And
they had foam fingers back then?
What were they? No, what they had were the original bob and head dolls,
yes, right.
Which was the only, I think, Giant souvenir I did not purchase. And, of course, they turned out to be worth thousands of dollars. But anyway, and then, of course, balancing that against the report, I was lucky enough to become a Giants beat writer in 2005, and then, collect a different type of experience along those years. So here come the winds from Candlestick to blow away our name tags. But anyway, so as John mentioned, Triumph did not want a historical recitation. And I don't think they wanted strictly first person, so I tried to present a mix of them. Obviously the World Series years were kind of anchors, so I included chapters on them. I mean, as we all know, anybody who's followed the Giants know there have been people who are cornerstones and pillars of the organization. So I wrote chapters on them: Mays, McCovey, Marichal, and Barry Bonds. And then I had one chapter that was just a grab bag of stuff and about Lincecum and Will Clark. I tried to throw in people. I couldn't get to everybody, unfortunately. I wrote this during last season, and so I kind of had to go for whatever was within reach, so to speak. I left out a lot of folks. Maybe if enough of you buy this book, there can be a If These Walls Could Talk Part 2, and I can include guys like Orlando Cepeda and Will Clark, who I kind of frankly omitted from unfortunately from this manuscript. But I had a lot of fun doing it, and I just hope who. Oh, of course, I have one last thing. I had to talk about Candlestick Park, seeing the wind there. I mean, anybody who's been any Giants fan of more than 20 years vintage has sure got some impressions about that place. So I just tried to have fun with it, and I hope the readers have fun with it too.
Chris was an English major at Stanford, so it wasn't surprising that you flip through the pages and come across lines from Faulkner and Fitzgerald and Kipling, and as it turns out, I read on, and the poem "If" by Kipling is what Chris actually presented to Barry Zito, because it pertained to his life. Zito, the pitcher who now is a songwriter in Nashville. I think he made most of his money playing baseball, not songwriting. But tell us that. What's the connection between Kipling and Barry Zito?
Yeah, he started out I don't know if you remember, he started out 5-0 one season.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't think a whole lot of people remember. I don't think it was I don't think it was the 2010 season. I want to say it was the 2009 season, the year before they got good. And he kept on insisting, I haven't changed. I don't let the fan, all these standing ovations I get, I haven't let those change me. I'm not dwelling on my success. I'm just going out and pitching the same game all the time. And by Rudyard Kipling had this line. So I'm paraphrasing now because I'm not that I wasn't that studious an English major, but something about being able to treat fame and failure exactly the same. And that's what Barry was kind of talking about. He wasn't any different than, going 5-0 than he was when he was going, at 7-17 with his 5.5 ERA and looking, getting booed out of AT&T Park. So that just when he talked about that made me think of the Kipling poem, and so I made a Xerox copy of it and presented it to him. Say, here, Barry, this guy kind of wrote about what you are talking about. So I kind of had fun with that, with him for a little bit.
And he said, "Cool, man."
That's pretty much what he said. And he went back to strumming his guitar.
Right.
But I had a similar experience with Buster Posey, actually, who's Buster tends to have lively exchanges with John in the clubhouse. What's the one he had? You asked him about why he didn't hit as well at home as he did on the road. This was a game after he had hit a home run at home. And he said, I don't know. Baseball's weird, John. And so that maybe it was a kind of a you had to be there thing, but we had fun with it. And so once in a while I'll go up to him and say, hey, baseball's weird, John. But Buster, during this one little, I guess, not diatribe, but, it was almost a mini diatribe of his, said that people don't understand what it's like to be, a lot of people don't understand really what it's like to be out there. And that reminded me of Teddy Roosevelt's speech about being in the arena, the man in the arena. And so I Xeroxed a copy of that and gave it to Buster and said, looked at it and said, can I keep this? I said, yeah, sure. So maybe we gave Buster something he hadn't picked up at Florida State.
Yeah, I wonder if that's why he's. Well, no, I won't go into what he didn't do recently in a brawl at the ballpark, but which he got a lot of credit for, by the way. But why fight? I'm a lover, not a fighter, and he got condemned for it because he didn't do the manly thing and start pushing and shoving, which really only involved two people and a couple of crazy big guys who whacked into each other. But going back to the book, it seems, and I'm the same way. I grew up in the North Bay, Chris in the South Bay, kind of leading parallel lives and meeting much later in life. And he paid good money for the tickets, 90 cents, and I snuck in. So that tells you which side of the tracks we were from. and right, 90 cents?
Oh, John, I went whole hog when they were charging $4 for box seats.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
Yeah. But I went to Half Price Tuesdays an awful lot.
So it always comes back to Mays. It always starts with Mays, comes back to Mays, and ends with Mays. And we both grew up on different ends of the spectrum, different ends of the Bay Area, and shared our stories later on. And his are pretty wonderful. He went to an awful lot of games and writes about every Marichal game he went to, and some of them were epic. He's probably the only person other than the clubhouse man, Mike Murphy, who witnessed not only Gaylord Perry's and Juan Marichal's last wins, but Tim Lincecum's and Matt Cain's first wins. So you're pretty old.
Yeah.
And and so there's a wonderful chapter on Mays. It's you can't miss this. And it's and questioning it, like I said, just a lot of fresh interviews from old timers, young fellas alike. But you talk to a lot of people about if there's anything people don't know about Mays, what is it? And what give us an example.
Yeah, a lot of the old, shouldn't call them old timers, former ball players said, I asked them, what was it about Willie that people should know that maybe they didn't or don't? And it was the fact that he was a great leader. Maybe this wasn't in the book, but just this past spring training, I saw there was one afternoon, Willie was in the clubhouse, as he likes to come there and just hang out, really. And Felipe Alou, who needs no introduction, sat on one side of Willie, and then Joe Amalfitano, the former utility infielder who spent, I guess, most of his career with the Giants, or large part of his career with the Giants, and is now an instructor, sat on the other side of Willie. And these two, 75, 80-year-old men, and I swear to God, they looked like they were 12 or 13 sitting next to Willie. And they're acting like 12 or 13-year-olds, gesticulating, asking questions, both smiling from ear to ear. I mean, they felt comfortable. It was like going to a high school or a college reunion and you slip back into whatever role, I guess, you had with your buddies or friends at the time. And they slipped back into their, not subordinate roles to Willie. Subordinate's kind of a mean word, but, he was the leader and they were his followers. Like Felipe himself once said, and I think I might have quoted this in the book, whatever city we went to in the National League, it was Willie Mays and company. That's how they referred to the Giants. And Felipe said, we didn't mind being part of the company. So,
and I read in the book that because of Mays, the Giants are like the Yankees became back in the Jeter days. When wherever the Giants went, then it was the show. They led. They didn't draw at Candlestick so much, but they led on the road in road attendance year after year, and that was largely because of Mays. But the thing about, and I read this in the book as well, there were, we all know how flashy he was, how colorful he was. He played in the Negro Leagues. He joined the big leagues just 4 years after Jackie Robinson showed up. So that shows you how far he goes back. And from the Negro Leagues, he brought a lot of flash and dash and entertainment to the game. And Chris, you wrote about how as a kid you recalled a time where, and Willie always talked about, I want to do something to entertain him, not just put up numbers and win games. I just want him to come back. And, you never know if some kid never seen me before, so I'm going to do something special for him or her. And there was a time where you thought he actually intentionally dropped a ball that he didn't lose for an error, but actually dropped it because he was so confident, so good at what he does that he just did that as an entertainment factor. Is that true?
Well, knowing what I know about him now, I wish I could ask him about it. He'd probably tell me, he'd probably scoff at me. Yeah. But, the game was a little was dragging a little bit, and there was a little pop fly, and he had that wonderful basket catch, and the ball just squirted out of his glove. And I'm sure all 8,000 or 9,000 of us who were at the game were thinking it was going to fall for an error, but he caught it, right above the grass, and it was the final out of the inning. This is kind of on the subject of what you were talking about, kind of not, but
Where he dropped the ball, yeah.
he dropped it, squirted out of his glove.
But then picked it up and, laughed.
I wish I could remember if it was barehanded or with his glove hand, but there was that went through the stands like he was going to make an error, but of course he didn't. So I asked him once whether Billy Williams, the great Hall of Fame outfielder for the Cubs, insisted that there was a game where the Giants were in a slump, and so Willie called the pitches from center field because he figured he could control the game that much by controlling the pitching. And I went to him with that, and he said, "No, I didn't do that." But there was something about the way he said he denied that maybe it was true. And Billy Williams insists that Willie did it.
Unlike Joe DiMaggio, who demanded that every time he showed up at a stadium or a gathering of any sort, he wanted and had to be sure that he was introduced as the greatest living ball player. Mays never said, "I'm the greatest." Mays never said, I should have been the home run king because I lost all those home runs in the military. When I didn't play, I lost all the home runs in the Candlestick Wind. But he says, if you want to say it, that's fine. And we have. But so the book has, wonderful chapter on Mays, wonderful chapter on McCovey, wonderful chapter on Marichal. Is the Barry Bonds chapter wonderful?
Oh, it's very wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And a chapter on 2010, another one on 12 and 14, and just new stuff that I didn't know about. Quotes from Romo going back to 12 and Wilson to 10, and Bumgarner. Yeah, it's just some new stuff that hasn't been printed or talked about, and some forwards by Mike Krukow and Brandon Crawford. And the chapter on Willie McCovey is aptly named "Nicest Man." We both saw him a lot at Candlestick, and I said, "Boy, that's a great title for a chapter."
He just he was different. I mean, I was talking to Hobie Landreth, the I don't want to use the word
Hobie
old.
Landreth.
Let's say vintage catcher,
third string catcher from the '60s.
Yeah, from the '60s. Yeah. First, what was he? The first player selected in the expansion draft by the Mets before the 1962 season, and so Hobie said whenever Willie McCovey then would, he was a rookie or second-year player, would walk in the room and smile. Everybody else smiled with him. He had, without being very vocal about it, he was very infectious. I guess when he showed up, some pitcher, Al Worthington or something like that, called, maybe it was Johnny Antonelli, called him Lovey-Dovey McCovey, and that kind of endeared him to his teammates. And I think the way, of course, everybody knows about the last out of the 1962 World Series, but I think the fact that he didn't pop up, he didn't strike out, he didn't hit a fly ball, he hit that vicious line drive to second base, and I think that made people love him more. Kind of like when here in San Francisco, when Arnold Palmer blew the '66 U.S. Open, people loved him even more after that because he was obviously going for it and playing hard, and wasn't going to lay up. He was going to go for the pin, and Willie Mack, swinging hard, to the very end, did what he could, even though it didn't work out.
Yeah, and if there's anybody who would like to chime in, please do, on questions for Chris about the state of, or the demise of the state of the team, whatever, currently, or going back to the 60s, or that's probably as far back as we go, in the 70s especially. Mays, here, great, perfect. Here's, yeah.
You're talking about Mays. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get to see him at the beginning of his career, but I got to see him play. And I read, books about him, and it sounds like he played with a lot of flash. And I'm just wondering, because now nowadays when a ball player shows flash, they always talk about the old school rules. You know, are they? I mean, you're supposed to play with your head down and run the bases, and when maybe a Latin ball player plays with a lot of style, people enjoy it, but some ball players don't. Did Mays catch flack for that when he came in? I mean, it wasn't that long after the integration of the league. You'd almost think you have to be careful. It sounds like he was played joyfully. You know.
To my knowledge, no, he did not catch flack. The Giants were smart enough to, you correct me if I'm wrong, John, step in here, but they were smart enough to let him play. In another book, I wish I could remember the title, it was about Willie's experiences with the Black Barons before he signed with the Giants. The foreword from that book describes Carl Hubble, who was then the Giants farm director, seeing Willie play for the first time, and it wasn't a Polo Grounds. It was sparsely attended game, and Alex Pompez, the scout who scouted Mays, was there with Hubble, and Alex was really nervous, hoping that Willie would play well and impress Hubble and all that. And there was a base hit to left center or something, and Willie went over and cut it off and threw it to second base to hold the runner at first, and the way it was described was his throw seemed to be rising when it hit second base. So that's one thing. And so Hubble noticed, hey, this is different. And then Willie came to bat, and Hubble said to himself, "Please God, don't let him be crappy." I'm substituting language there. It was a much sharper word he used. And I guess Willie hit the ball 9 miles. So. No, they did not try to change him. They were smart enough, Chuck Feeney and then the vice president, general manager, and Horace Stoneham, and of course Hubble, not to change him. However, I guess in the late 50s, all the Giants had a ton of talented outfielders in their system, and they all started catching, making basket catches. And somebody said, "Who messed up these kids? Who loused them up?" Well, it's obvious who did it. So. It wasn't for everybody. Let's put it that way. It was just, kind of like Willie McCovey's swing. Kids, don't try this at home. So.
And if you're good enough, you're probably left alone. Albert Pujols hit his 600th home run last night, and it took a minute and a half to get out of the batter's box, but nobody objected. Whereas Mays, he didn't do that. They didn't do that back then, but he was flashy, like you said. He got thrown at a lot more than McCovey did. I think they were afraid of McCovey. They threw at Mays, but Mays didn't. It didn't matter because he was so good at getting out of the ball, getting out of the way. And Dusty Baker used to say, back when he was managing here, that kids just don't know how to get out of the way. They're in there and they wait till the last second and then they get beamed. Where Mays never wore that helmet or the flap or any of that stuff, just the cap in the early days of his career. And Drysdale and Gibson, all these guys threw at him, but he just got out of the way, never got hurt. So that's also the art of it. And Bonds, too. They didn't throw at Bonds. Nobody liked him, but they didn't throw at him because he was just so good. You don't want to be the guy that knocks him out of the game like Hunter Strickland just did with one of the best players. That's why so many Giant teammates just didn't appreciate what the guy did. That was an independent act, not a team-initiated act. So, yes?
Just to follow up on the question about Flash and Johnny Cueto's remarks recently about not enough Latino ball players. And as the Giants team, I talked to Marty Lurie about this at the beginning of the season, getting blander. You let, Romo's gone, Pagan is gone, Peavy is gone, Lincecum and Apfelt before that, people who had like spark. And it seems like the Giants team itself is becoming more corporate, let's say.
Yeah.
What do you think about what Johnny Cueto had to say about this?
Those 5 names you mentioned, you just went 5 for 5, I think. I'll confess it's something I haven't written about a whole lot, but I wonder how these guys today, I have talked about privately a lot, but just how these guys establish chemistry now. They go back to their lockers and they're doing this.
That's how they talk to the guy 3 feet away. They don't turn and talk. They just, I'll be there. Oh, it's okay. See you after work.
They're studying their cell phones instead of, having a beer together, or maybe they do that, but in the privacy of their little lounge. And I think, sure, it takes time to build chemistry, but they better take more time because it's not there. I mean, those guys have personality. I think these guys, I think the personality's there. I don't know if they're just letting it flow. The last days of spring training, I really didn't detect a whole lot of problems in that realm. I remember when Buster and Brandon Crawford came back from the World Baseball Classic, there was a fresh energy around the club. I thought, this is a good thing. This is, it was reminiscent of 2010, 2012, and 2014. But something got lost in translation. One name I don't think you mentioned. Did you mention Matt Duffy? I will try to write this at some point. I think unless John steals it from me, there's almost like a curse of Matt Duffy since they traded him last year. Even though they traded him for a good reason, and even though he may no longer be an effective player himself because of his poor guy, because of his Achilles problems, there's something got lost there in the clubhouse. He was a guy who absolutely, positively loved to play every game, and he loved to play, as corny as it sounds, he loved having Giants across his chest. He absolutely loved it. I remember there was a game I guess you'd say that it was a meaningless game. I don't know if there's such a thing as a meaningless Giant-Dodger game in mid-May. I mean, it wasn't for the pennant or anything. I saw him run to his locker. He had this smile on his face. He was set a world land speed record for tying his shoes. And I happened to be standing nearby, and he looked up at me and he said, "I love playing games like this." It was May 15th or something. But, everybody wants to see that from ball players. And there aren't a whole lot of guys who are that way openly.
So Johnny Cueto, I don't think will be back next year. I think he'll opt out of this contract. He's got a 2-year opt clause. Recently, he did speak about the lack of Latin players in the clubhouse, and I think it was 2012 when they had about a half a dozen Venezuelan players, and it was a real lively. They were all in a corner, and it was loud, it was musical, it was fun, it was festive, and the rest of the team kind of fed off that. But now you're right. You go in, and there are 25 guys on their phones. And Cueto realizes this, and a lot of it has to do with these guys. The fun and the atmosphere, and not just it is just the money, but after the money, let's have fun, let's play on a good team. And I don't know if he thinks either of those would happen next year. So I remember back in the Al Rosen days in the late '80s, there were no Latin guys, and they happened across Jose Uribe, and that was it. That was the only guy in the organization. And then, slowly but surely, that changed over the years. Felipe Alou came back to the team as a manager after Baker did, and so you really saw it in 2012 with Sandoval and just all his merry men were just a real lively group. And 14, not as much, and now you just don't have the diversity. And let it be said too that all these teams have come and gone, these championship teams, without, an African-American presence that you had in the 60s. It was just unbelievable how that team compared to maybe even the team across the bay, minus Reggie Jackson. And it's just funny how the nucleus and the chemistry changes from ownership to ownership, from manager to manager, from era to era, from year to year. So that's duly noted, I think, what he said about the lack of Latin players. And, whether, I don't know if that means anything on the field, wins or losses, but question? Right?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We'll let her answer. I can pick up on that some more, but first we'll hear this lovely question.
Well, but it's actually links to what you've just been talking about. You see the team chemistry with the Warriors.
Oh.
And I just wonder, in baseball, how do you get that? And is that important for a winning season or a remarkably winning season?
Billy Bean says no, right?
Billy Bean says no.
Billy Bean says no. I think most of the Giants people, after experiencing 2010, 2012, 2014, would say yes. Of course, what comes first, the chemistry or the winning? There was I don't know. There was an interesting incident about 3 weeks ago. I don't quite know what happened, but all of a sudden, the team was in Citi Field in New York, and they had lost 3 or 4 in a row. That another horrible road trip was going to end. They were playing the finale, a day game, at Citi Field, and all of a sudden, these peals of laughter broke out from a room, way back where we're off limits, where we weren't allowed. And I was thinking, what the heck just happened? Somebody told a funny joke, or recounted some funny incident, or somebody pulled a joke on somebody, because about 20 players were in there, and they all laughed. And that was the game where Christian Arroyo got the double in the 9th inning, cleared the bases, won the game for the Giants. So I was thinking, big turnaround here. They're together, they're getting along great, and they win a game. Can this propel them? And as of now, they're 10 or 11 below 500, so it didn't work for that long. Management is aware of this. I know I haven't talked to Bobby Evans, the current general manager, much about this, but I know Brian Sabian, who was the architect of so many of those Giants teams. He laments the absence of or the reduction in college scholarships, which prevents more African Americans or whatever from playing. And he realizes that a mixture of I guess styles or flavors, if you will, personalities, helps make a good team. But you just can't run out and and sign these guys. It's tough to do. So it has to evolve. It almost has to be organic, with a plan in mind, I guess. So it could take years. It doesn't take a whole lot. I'll try to be real quick about this. There were guys like Guillermo Mota, who maybe didn't light it up on the scoreboard, light up or the radar gun, or didn't have great stats, but a great guy for bridging the gap between the Caucasian players and the Latin players. Juan Uribe, he was fantastic. He didn't walk; he strutted everywhere he went. But guys followed his lead.
And I don't mean to paint a glum picture of the clubhouse now, because I see them mostly in defeat. When they do win, there are some good times. Brandon Crawford is the DJ, and it's always lively after wins with his music, which might not be appropriate for some families. But it's not just the Latin guys or the African American guys. I mean, you go back to 2010 with Pat Burrell and Aubrey Huff. A couple of colorful characters, and that really lightened up the clubhouse. And I think it definitely matters. But we had another question, I think. Yes. Mm-hmm.
After his first season, that accident, he was hurt really badly. So I'm wondering if he's permanently damaged, if he has a long career ahead, or what.
Well, I think that Mike Krukow said on the radio after this brawl that he was told not to get involved in the pile in that sort of thing because of all the damage in 2011, which cost him the season, which cost the team the playoffs, cost the team a lot of money. And, the next year he rebounded as an MVP. But I don't know. He doesn't have the power he once has. He doesn't have the gap-to-gap, double power, or certainly not the home run power. He went about 10 days where he hit quite a few, but he's not driving in runs. His numbers with runners in scoring position isn't good. But what about his future?
I personally thought his future would be at first base. That's the one other position he can play. My vast experience, with which John referred to earlier, includes covering the Houston Astros, where I saw Craig Biggio switch from catching to second base, and look what it did for his career. He's got a plaque in Cooperstown right now. I really think moving out of out of catching would help Buster's offense, but the club insists, and who am I to say they're wrong, that Buster really provides is a benefit to the pitching staff as a catcher, even if he were to hit 220 or 240 with 15 home runs. So I don't know if his offensive potential will ever be fully realized. It's intriguing to see him hit for such a high average this year. I don't know if there's let's just say for purposes of discussion he continues to do that. I don't know if there's ever been a catcher like that who hits for such a high average with low run production numbers and maintains a 10 to 12 year career. But so this is kind of uncharted territory for the Giants and for baseball, because I don't know if there's a parallel. Maybe Jason Kendall at one point hit for a high average, but he stayed behind a plate and he ended up driving in about 40 or 50 runs a year. Wasn't very productive, with RBI or whatever. So
and he had that real bad injury with his leg, and then stopped run producing after that. But still hit well. But there's another question.
Actually, it's an anecdote about Willie Mays. I grew up in San Francisco, and I was in 4th grade when the Giants came. And for about 2 years, he purchased a home in a neighborhood called Forest Hill on Mendoza, and he lived next door to one of my classmates, and we were like really jealous. But she used to say, "Oh, he gave great Halloween candy to the kids in the neighborhood." And then the other thing I wanted to say is, if you have a chance, listen. Marty Lurie interviewed Marvin Bernard this morning. It was a fabulous interview. And there was a really funny story. He was ready to graduate high school, and these baseball scouts came up and said, "Well, would you be interested in being drafted?" And he said, "Oh, my mother would not permit that." And he didn't realize what draft meant. He'd come from Nicaragua when he was 12, and he thought being drafted into the Army. And they go, no, not that kind of draft. But if you have a chance to catch it, it was really a wonderful interview.
He was the last homegrown outfielder that did much on this team. And that was a long time ago, and he was the 50th round pick that year. So that doesn't say much about the outfielders they've had over the years. And by the way, Willie's place is the place to go still on Halloween. Just this past year and the year before, there was, from what I hear from his assistant, there were just lines, around the bend because, he loves kids, and that's really his biggest holiday, as he calls it, Halloween.
There was I don't think I'm telling stories out of stories that can't be told. I think this is legit, and maybe John's probably heard this. Back in the day when he played, I guess before Christmas time, he'd make up all these little care packages of signed baseballs and miniature bats and autographed photos and give them to the writers, our predecessors, because he knew they'd all get asked for, from their cousins and nephews and nieces and kids in the neighborhood, they'd all want, "Oh, can you get me a photo, something, an autographed picture or whatever of Willie Mays?" And so there they went. They'd have their little stash of Willie Mays stuff. So he was thoughtful in his own way.
He was in the Nationals clubhouse the other day as a guest of Dusty Baker's, and there was a round table in the middle of the clubhouse, and these grown men of 20 and 30 something were 10 and 12 again, just crowding around him and listening to the tales. And Willie would shake their hand, and then he would hold on to the hand. And Willie doesn't see all that well, but as Dusty Baker said, he feels well. And he always had something to say about somebody's hand, and Willie's hands were incredible. I mean, I don't know how he gripped the ball or put his hand wrapped around the bat, but every time I go in to shake his hand, I just say, okay, it's like a mental psych-up job. I got to go in because, once he cuts you short, you're just stinging for days. So you try to go in and make that powerful handshake and man up, right? But I'm always failing him. And anyway, he was in the clubhouse, and Max Scherzer walks by, the wonderful pitcher, strikeout pitcher, and he was throwing that day. And Dusty said, Max doesn't ever talk on the day he pitches beforehand. It's all a mental part of preparation. But in this case, he talked to Willie, and Willie shook his hand and said, "Well, he doesn't talk. When you get a hot dog, we'll sit down and talk." So, and I mean, it's amazing how we're kind of fortunate to have what we do here, But just walking in and seeing Willie Mays entertain a bunch of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds on the Washington Nationals, the best team in the league, is pretty amazing. Unlike any other team, the Giants have Hall of Famers who are there every day. You don't see Johnny Bench with the Reds when you go to Cincinnati. You don't see Koufax at Dodger Stadium all the time, but you see Mays and McCovey every single day. Mays in the clubhouse and Murph's office before games. Then he goes up to his suite. McCovey, alongside the broadcast booth next to Krukow and Kuiper and Miller and them. And, I mean, they watch the game. I mean, they're paid to be Mays and McCovey, but they take it all in. And when somebody asks them about it, they have some pretty good ideas, obviously. So it's pretty good assets. We had a question over here.
Oh, yes. I'm enjoying the book, and I noticed you have a chapter on Tim Lincecum. And I was always intrigued by his free-spirited nature and how people, even in the book, were not giving up on him. So my question to you, I do sports astrology, so I have my own theories about what happened to him. But have you ever seen a player go to such heights and then plummet down to the descents? And it begs the question, where is he now?
The only player I can think of who had that kind of ascent and subsequent rapid descent was maybe Mark the Bird Fidrich, and that was caused by injuries. Tim had injuries, but not an arm injury. It was that hip problem. So in many ways, both good and bad, Tim is really an unparalleled individual. As far as what he's doing now, several months ago I talked to his father, which is, I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart, but let's just say he's kind of a stage parent, so to speak, and whatever that phrase is. And he said Tim was throwing and trying to work himself back into shape. I didn't write anything because I'd rather talk to somebody more, I guess, official or connected with the game. I even tried Tim himself, this cell phone number he gave us about 10 years ago that I don't think it ever works. So my guess is that he still wants to pitch.
He's still throwing. Every time I check in with the agent, he says, check in 2 weeks. So I checked in the other day. He said, check in 2 weeks. So, I mean, there's still hope. It's highly doubtful after what he did with the Angels last year. When you don't have the velocity or the command, you just can't win as he used. I mean, this is Dontrell Willis, maybe. Same kind of thing. He just kind of fell off the map.
Hi, I had the good fortune of seeing the Giants' first game when they beat the Dodgers 8-0 at Seal Stadium because my dad was supposed to get tickets, but they didn't. They ran out of tickets, so I decided I'd get a job as a vendor. And I had a 7-year career as a vendor for the Giants, and so I also got to see Willie McCovey in his first game. I think he went 4 for 4 against Robin Roberts. Mm-hmm. So I had 2 questions.
In the book, Robert said they were all bloop singles.
Yes.
I remember reading. But 2 home
weren't,
runs.
though.
No, they weren't.
I think one was a triple.
The 2 home runs, and yeah.
So the question, in your looking at the Giants, have you ever seen a situation where they have had such a weak position? I mean, left field, right? That's a position where someone should be hitting for an average and for power, and they have run so many players through left field. And I just have to wonder if Bobby Evans, didn't plan very well. Have you seen a situation like that, or where do you think it's going?
Well, I think it all had to do with dollars and cents because they don't have a salary cap, but they do have a salary cap. It's hidden as a luxury tax. So there's a threshold of about $193 million, and they're just above there. And if they went out and got a $10 million player, because they're above the threshold for the 3rd straight year, they have to pay a 50-cent tax on every dollar they spend. So if they went out and got someone for $10 million, it's really a $15 million investment by them, which they have plenty of money for. They have this so-called sellout streak, which You know, a lot of sections are just like this. You know, I'm not sure how streaky that is. But, yeah, I think it all came down to dollars and cents, and they painted the picture of, well, let's try to go homegrown with a couple prospects. But those prospects weren't 22, 23, and both of them got hurt, so everything backfired.
Yeah, that said, if I may slip into PG-13 language, they half-assed to left field. They really did. If you want to win, go out and get somebody. Now, in fairness to the Giants, what free agent hitter wants to come hit in AT&T Park? They just don't. It is where hitting goes to die. Long drives go to die. So that part of it, I will say, is tough on the Giants. I thought, John, they should have signed that Saunders guy, Michael Saunders, who the Phillies have. And I watched the game yesterday. He's hitting 219. You know, great personnel move by me that would have been. You know, so that's it's tough to find a good guy. But I remember my first two left fielders I saw play for the Giants were Ken Henderson and Gary Matthews, two pretty decent. They'd kill to have Ken Henderson or Gary Matthews play left field for them now. And 10 different starting since Bonds left. 10 different opening day left fielders each year. Next year will be number 11. And so it's going to go on, unfortunately.
Second question I had, and maybe you covered that early before I came in, was I love reading your pieces on MLB.com.
Thank you.
And it seems like you're writing less, I mean, it used to be they would have, you know, somebody write for the Giants and then somebody write for the opponents, and now they've obviously got one person writing, or, you know, they have one article instead of two. And I just wondered what controls how much we get to read of you.
Yeah, well, you're pretty perceptive. Thank you. We are combining that game format. I still write what's called a sidebar. That's just on the Giants, which is kind of substitutes for what I would write before about the game. So now maybe if Bumgarner has a good game, for instance, I'll write something that's exclusively about his performance and maybe not about, you know, the 7 or 8 runs the Giants scored. So I'm writing maybe a little less, but not as much. It's maybe harder to find, unfortunately. So keep your eye, keep clicking.
Can I interest you in a newspaper subscription? Would you like to subscribe to the newspaper? Maybe. Okay, never mind. You're the one. Yeah.
So back to left field again. We talked about Marvin Bernard as being the last homegrown left fielder. So two things. One, why has it been so difficult to get a homegrown left fielder? And the other is what's happening with Pagan? Is he in baseball anymore? He had a very good 2016 season. I know he's older. He's somewhat injury prone, but he played like 130 games last year. He stole a bunch of bases. He was a spark plug. Michael Morse? I mean, I would rather see Pagan on the team.
Pagan wanted $5 million. The Giants didn't want to give him $5 million. They didn't think he was worth that. He had a real nice World Baseball Classic, but I think that, as Sabian always says, ship has sailed. He might not have been the best clubhouse guy, might not have been the best teammate. Is this off the record?
Go ahead.
I think they just kind of wanted to move on. He produced when he was healthy, but a lot of that time he wasn't healthy, and I don't think they were real appreciative that he didn't play on certain days. Is that accurate?
I say that's accurate. My favorite, just as a quick aside, my favorite Brian Sabian ship has sailed statement came in conjunction with Benji Molina, who they absolutely positively weren't going to re-sign. And then one day I'm driving through somewhere, and I hear, on KMBR, the Giants have re-signed Benji Molina. This is about 2 weeks before spring training 2010. I almost drove off the road. I mean, so you never know about that. With Pagan, John pretty much summed it up. He had kind of worn out his welcome with the club. He apparently was close to a deal with the Orioles. You probably heard about that, but they have this mysterious way of administering their physical, the mandatory physical exam, he failed the exam, and I guess Superman would fail their physical exam. It's not very fair, I've been told. So it's too bad he's not playing, but he kind of made his own bed to some degree.
What about the left field thing? I know it's an often asked question, but
Well, the draft hasn't helped. I mean, they got drafted Gary Brown in the first round the 1 year.
Yeah.
He didn't pan out. I mean, I think they saw him as a center field type guy and didn't work. Nate Shearholtz could have been the guy, injury prone. Who else?
That's it. Nobody. Freddie Lewis. Thank
Fred
you.
Lewis. One
Fred
year,
Lewis,
had
yeah.
a year and a half maybe.
Yeah.
Just didn't have any staying power. Travis Ishikawa, I was just watching a replay of his. Went on YouTube the other day and watched a replay of his home run, but he wasn't a left fielder. It's amazing they won the 2014 World Series without a real left fielder.
They had one player that year, didn't they?
They had one player, some guy who pitched.
And rides dirt bikes
Yeah.
not very well. There's a great anecdote in here about Marichal, and it brings the 12-year-old Chris Haft into the story, and I love how he links the current day to the past day, and it's reporting, and then all of a sudden you're transformed into the golden era. And here's, however old you are now, Chris Haft, coming up to Marichal one day during his visit. You tell the story about what you presented Marichal that
Well,
day.
I knew this was kind of, frankly, a little bit unprofessional, but I just could. I said, this may be the only. I said to myself, this may be the only chance I get to, talk to this guy again. You never know. So, I kept. Do you guys remember scrapbooks? So I kept this little scrapbook of Juan, and it was only, and actually it was only his last few years, so it wasn't that thick, but because his career was declining. But Juan shuts out Dodgers, blah blah blah, and stuff like that. So I said, Mr. Marichal, I'd love you to look at this at least. And I thought he'd say, "Oh, nice kid," and shake my hand, maybe answer a few questions. End of interview. He took my scrapbook like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he just turned page after page, not even that fast. I mean, it was as if he was looking at these headlines and these photos, and he was saying, "My God, did I do all that stuff?" And just earlier that year, or the year before, out came the book about his great 16-inning duel with Warren Spahn. So of course he knew. And he still knew who he was, and he's still revered in the Dominican today. And he had just come from the Hall of Fame, where all those guys get treated like royalty. So this was, looking at my scrapbook, I would think was nothing new or nothing out of the ordinary. But again, he was just absorbing everything on these pages. I guess he. Somebody said to me, when you get older. When ball players get older, they're allowed. They kind of feel like they're allowed to bask in themselves a little more because they pretty much spent their whole career before that trying to work for the team. And so, maybe Juan was kind of soaking in, all these games he pitched.
That's pretty cool. See if the audience could remember some of these names, but let me ask, and I'm not sure what the answer might be, but I could guess. Who were you inspired by in terms, I don't mean the people you mentioned here, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, and Kipling, but sports writers, baseball writers, when you were a kid growing up in the Bay Area? Well,
first and foremost was Bob Stevens, who wrote for the Chronicle, who gave us this great function here. He was very, I guess, I don't know if literary was the word, but he wrote beautifully. That's maybe not too highfalutin a word to use. And he could still report. He seemed like he had a great rapport with the players. Of course, he had reported for years. And I didn't consciously try to copy him, but just reading him at the breakfast table every day just kind of soaked in.
Yeah.
Roger Angell was a huge influence of mine. He was a guy who understood baseball and understood what it was to be a fan, and could express it so lyrically I couldn't help but be captivated by him. John's ex-boss, Glenn Schwartz, was a outstanding writer, great guy to follow every day, very pointed, but it got to the point, could analyze what was going on with the team, win or lose. And Ron Fimwright, when he was still a sports columnist, before he went to Sports Illustrated, when he was a sporting tiger for the Sporting Green, could mix humor with fact and wasn't afraid to take anything or anybody on. So, and you're pretty good too, so.
Yeah, well, thanks. I wasn't prepared for that. Anyway, is maybe one more question?
Oh, with that top, he's got to, we got to acknowledge him.
A's question? Oh, no.
What is Sabian's role at this point? Is Bobby Evans making all the decisions? Is it general manager by committee? What's going on?
For the most part, it's Bobby. Bobby's doing it day to day, but I think Brian is more like maybe a CEO or, he's got the whole umbrella. I think still, spreads from him. But Bobby, I think for the most part, it's Bobby.
Yeah, he has, I think, the final call. He does things without Sabian's approval just because of a time, management thing. The trade deadline last year, for instance, for example, Evans was on the front line on the phone talking and negotiating, and Sabian was scouting Christian Arroyo to see if the kid was legit. Is this a guy we're going to keep, or is this going to be a guy that we're going to move to get a closer that we should have had against the Cubs in Game 4? Well, they didn't trade Arroyo, and they lost Game 4, but now they have Arroyo. So he's kind of a top advisor. He's moved upstairs, but I think, Evans obviously was hired by him and groomed by him, but Sabian's given him the authority to make the calls. And left field hasn't turned out. Maybe the bullpen, the extended bullpen hasn't turned out. The rotation hasn't been good, in large part. But the beer's still $12, so you have that. Anyway, thanks so much for all this. This is wonderful.
Thank you very much.
If These Walls Could Talk by Chris Haft. Chris, thanks for coming out.
Oh, thank you, John. Appreciate it.